Ward arrived at the small town library just as the morning fog began to lift over the coastal streets. The smell of salt lingered in the air, carried by the gentle breeze from the harbor, mixing with the faint aroma of old books. To anyone passing by, she was the very definition of unremarkable, an ordinary librarian, quiet, unassuming, and polite. Her brown hair was pulled neatly into a bun, and her glasses reflected the soft morning light as she arranged the day's deliveries on the front desk. The locals greeted her with nods or polite smiles, some children squealing happily as she handed them their requested books. Life was one of quiet routine, ordered and predictable. She woke at 6 each morning, prepared a modest breakfast, and walked the short distance to the library. She knew the town intimately, every street, every corner, every resident. She could sense when something was amiss, even in a town that had grown accustomed to safety and comfort. And yet, despite her calm demeanor, her past was a tightly sealed secret, a past she had carefully buried beneath layers of normalcy. From the moment she stepped into the library, her senses were alert. She noticed the small details others overlooked, the way the door creaked slightly when opened too fast, the faint smell of mildew from an old stack of donated books, the irregular patterns in the shadows cast by the morning sun filtering through the tall windows. To anyone else, she appeared serene and focused, cataloging books or guiding visitors to the sections they needed. But inside, her mind moved with the precision of someone trained to notice everything, to anticipate problems before they arose. The town children adored her. She always had a story ready, whether it was about far-off lands, adventurous heroes, or quiet lessons hidden in seemingly ordinary tales. They didn't know, and she never told, that the stories she told often mirrored her own experiences, lessons in survival, resilience, and bravery disguised as fairy tales and historical accounts. Found solace in her work. The library was a sanctuary, a place where she could remain hidden from a world that once demanded everything of her and gave little in return. On this particular morning, a low hum of activity hinted at something unusual. Military personnel were moving through town, their presence noticeable yet subtle. A temporary deployment at the nearby coastal naval base had brought an influx of officers and special operations teams, all in town for training exercises and coordination with local authorities. Watched from her perch behind the counter as the townspeople whispered among themselves, curiosity and anxiety blending in hushed tones. She didn't flinch, didn't react, she simply observed. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, followed their movements, noting the subtle hierarchy in their formation and the way certain individuals commanded attention without speaking. Among the newcomers was Commander Jack, a man whose reputation preceded him in the special operations community. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than most could imagine and lived to tell the story. His dark eyes scanned the streets methodically, not missing a single detail. Had trained himself to read people, to detect anomalies, to sense when someone was hiding their true abilities. When his gaze landed on behind the library counter, something stirred. There was a discipline in her posture, a subtle awareness in the way she moved that set her apart from the rest of the town. Noticed him too, though she made no outward sign of recognition. She had learned long ago that revealing one's awareness could be dangerous. Her past had taught her the value of observation, of patience, and of blending in when necessary. Yet's presence was different. There was something in the way he carried himself, the careful weight of his movements, that resonated with her instincts. She couldn't yet place it, but a faint tension flickered across her senses, a whisper of recognition that hinted at a shared history of discipline and training, albeit separated by circumstances and time. As the morning unfolded, the library became alive with visitors. Children's laughter mingled with the quiet rustle of pages. Elderly residents drifted from shelf to shelf, seeking comfort in familiar stories or the escape of new narratives. Assisted each patron with grace, her voice calm and soothing, a stark contrast to the intensity that simmered just beneath the surface of her being. She guided the children with patience, corrected misfiled books with precision, and responded to inquiries with knowledge that seemed encyclopedic. Yet, every so often, her gaze flickered to the door or the street outside, a subtle check of her environment, a reflex born from years when danger was never far away. Observing from across the street, found himself intrigued. There was an inexplicable sense of familiarity in her movements. The way she adjusted her glasses without taking her eyes off the room, the subtle shift in her stance when someone approached the counter, even the way she inhaled quietly before speaking. It all suggested a level of control and situational awareness that went far beyond what an ordinary librarian would possess. He made a mental note to learn more about her, though he knew better than to rush conclusions. Someone with her poise and discipline could see through attempts at intrusion or inquiry with ease. Despite her composed exterior, his mind briefly wandered to the life she had left behind. Missions, deployments, operations that required split-second decisions and unflinching resolve. Lives lost, friends gone, choices that had shaped her into the woman she was today. She had chosen this quiet town, this library, this life, not out of fear, but out of necessity. The world outside had demanded more than she could give without sacrificing the last remnants of herself. Here, amidst the shelves and stories, she could exist without expectation, without obligation. Here, she could breathe. Yet even in the safety of routine, knew that peace was fragile. The arrival of military personnel, the subtle tension in the air, and the presence of a man who seemed to read people as easily as a book, all of it hinted that her past might not remain buried forever. She had learned to live in quiet observation, but she had also learned that secrets have a way of surfacing when least expected. For now she continued her work, her hands deftly sorting books, her voice calm and steady, her mind alert and ready. Commander, meanwhile, continued his silent observation. He didn't approach, he simply watched, noting details others overlooked. Something about Ward was different. Ordinary on the surface, yes, but layered with experience, discipline, and a quiet strength that hinted at untold stories. He could feel it in the way she moved, the way she reacted to her environment, and the subtle authority in her gestures. She was hiding something, and he intended to find out what it was. By midday, the library was filled with the familiar hum of activity, children's laughter echoing between shelves, the gentle rustle of pages, and the occasional whispered conversation. Navigated it all effortlessly, maintaining the calm presence that had become her shield. Yet beneath the quiet exterior, her instincts never rested. Every sound, every shadow, every unexpected movement registered in her mind. She was Ward, the librarian. But she was also a woman who had once been something else entirely. Someone who had survived extraordinary circumstances and carried skills that could save lives, or end them. And somewhere across the street, Commander continued to watch, unaware that the quiet librarian he observed was far more than anyone in this town could ever imagine. The town was quiet that afternoon, the sun spilling golden light across the cobblestone streets. Ward had just finished organizing the donations, a crate of old maps, local history books, and a worn leather journal that smelled faintly of sea salt. She hummed softly, a habit she had retained from long nights in remote safe houses, when the stillness was broken by a sharp, sudden bang. A car had backfired outside the library. Most of the townsfolk froze in shock, startled by the noise. A young boy dropped his backpack with a clatter and screamed. Women gasped, and a few older men instinctively moved to shield the children nearby. Chaos rippled through the parking lot, small but panicked. Didn't flinch. In an instant she assessed the situation. Her mind calculated trajectories, distances, potential threats, reflexes ingrained from years of training she had worked hard to leave behind. Without hesitation, she dropped low, sweeping the child into her arms with careful precision. Her movements were fluid, economical, and lethal in their efficiency, though the crowd would never know that. From across the street, Commander Jack had observed the entire incident. He had been taking notes, analyzing the small town as part of his temporary assignment, But this moment arrested his attention. He watched Ward move with the grace and efficiency of someone whose entire life had been trained for situations like this. Her eyes scanned every corner, noting exits, possible dangers, and the reactions of bystanders. His pulse quickened. He had seen a lot. He had seen operators in Afghanistan, Iraq, and classified missions he could never speak about. But's movements, the way she pivoted, shielded, and directed without hesitation, was textbook elite training. It was a silent, invisible symphony of control. Her hands never faltered. She never hesitated. She never panicked. When the initial shock subsided and people began murmuring, gently placed the child on their feet, ensuring their safety before anyone else could react. She straightened, brushed her hands lightly against her skirt, and smiled softly, muttering, "Old habits." Her voice was calm, almost dismissive, but the power behind those words was unmistakable to someone trained to hear them. The crowd hesitated, unsure whether to question her or simply marvel at what had just happened. Most of them saw only a librarian who had acted out of instinct, only knew better. He could feel the adrenaline residue in her posture, the disciplined breathing, the quiet alertness that never relaxed. She was not ordinary. Took a step closer, careful not to alarm her. He had learned to read people like open books. There was history here, layers of experience buried beneath civility and ordinary routine, a life lived in extremes, tempered by survival and loss. Ward had not always been a librarian. She had once been something else entirely, and her performance in that brief moment confirmed his suspicions. Sensed his gaze on her, though she did not turn. She had long ago developed the instinct to detect observation without looking directly at the observer. For years, it had saved her life. But this man was different. She could feel him analyzing every microexpression, every twitch of muscle, every imperceptible shift in posture. He was a predator of insight, not a threat of force. Her lips pressed together briefly, a subtle acknowledgement that he was closer to the truth than anyone else had ever been. "Commander," one of the local deputies called out, stepping into the lot. "Are you okay?" Nodded politely. "Yes, the child is fine." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes never stopped scanning, checking, evaluating. The deputy relaxed slightly, assuming it was merely a startled citizen reacting well under stress. But's mind raced. The precision, timing, and composure displayed were impossible for someone without extensive training. His instincts told him that Ward was hiding a past far beyond the quiet, orderly life of a librarian. As the deputy escorted the car owner away, returned inside, her composure as flawless as it had always been. Children resumed their reading, parents murmured reassurances, and life in the small town continued as if nothing extraordinary had occurred, but remained outside, lingering, analyzing. Every movement made reinforce the suspicion forming in his mind. She wasn't just trained. She had been forged in the crucible of something far harsher than any town library. That evening, as closed the library, the sun had begun to sink behind the low hills, casting long shadows across the streets. She moved through the aisles with practiced care, double-checking the locking mechanisms, scanning for potential vulnerabilities, another habit from her past life. Even now, after years of deliberate concealment, the reflexes remained. Followed her discreetly, curious but cautious. He had learned that confronting someone of skill directly without first understanding their history could backfire. The woman was capable of reading threats before they arose. He needed more than instinct to reach her. He needed evidence, patterns, a trail that would confirm what his gut had already deduced. As reached the back exit, she paused, sensing a presence behind her, a shadow of observation. She slowed, adjusting her stance subtly, ready to respond if necessary. Yet when she turned, it was not a threat that met her gaze, but a man with measured movements, calm eyes, and a deliberate patience. Raised his hand in a non-threatening gesture. "I just want to talk," he said evenly. Studied him for a moment, her mind assessing. Too much patience, too much control, yet no aggressive intent. Intriguing. She allowed herself a small nod. "Talk," she replied, her voice soft but controlled, carrying an authority that belied the simplicity of her words. Inside, she thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. A simple car backfire had triggered instincts she had hoped were long buried. It reminded her that her past, no matter how deeply she buried it, was never fully erased. And now, someone had noticed. Standing across from her, knew he was dealing with more than a librarian. Her posture, the way her eyes tracked movement, the calm but decisive energy she exuded, it all told him she had survived extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps she had once been one of the most effective operatives he could imagine, and perhaps he was witnessing the awakening of a story long hidden. Walked away first, retreating to her desk but not without leaving a faint impression in his mind, precise, composed, deadly if necessary, yet gentle when choosing. Realized she was a woman whose life could not be summed up in polite small-town labels. Just the librarian was a mask, a carefully curated story for the town. Beneath it was someone far more extraordinary. That night, as the town slept under the hush of twilight, sat at her desk, quietly cataloging books and repairing old bindings. Her mind, however, was far from calm. Every sound, the distant call of a seagull, the creak of an old sign, the muffled steps of late night, registered in her consciousness. She had chosen this life of quiet anonymity, but moments like today reminded her that the world she left behind could reach her even here. On the other hand, returned to his temporary lodging, reviewing mental notes. He replayed every movement, every decision, every subtle gesture had made during the incident. He could not shake the certainty forming in his mind. This librarian had a past so extraordinary that it seemed impossible, yet everything he had observed confirmed it. She was hiding something monumental, and he intended to find out what it was, carefully, patiently, and with the respect her skill demanded. The small town, oblivious to the layers of intrigue that had brushed against its quiet streets, continued on. Children slept peacefully, parents relaxed after minor shocks, and life appeared normal. But for Ward and for Commander, nothing would ever be the same. A spark had been lit, a curiosity awakened, and a secret long buried was beginning to stir once more. The following morning, arrived at the library earlier than usual. Coastal town was slowly waking to another routine day, gulls calling over the harbor and fishermen preparing their boats. She moved quietly among the shelves, dusting spines and arranging returns, but her mind remained alert. The previous day's incident, the car backfire, the child, the sudden presence of Commander lingered in her thoughts. Though she had acted instinctively, she felt the faint prick of awareness that her hidden past was not entirely buried. Someone had noticed. Someone had recognized her. Meanwhile, had begun his own investigation, not through confrontation, but through observation and subtle inquiries. He was a man accustomed to reading people and patterns, and Ward presented a puzzle he could not ignore. To the townspeople, she was harmless, ordinary, and gentle, a librarian whose greatest danger seemed to be misplaced books or overdue fines. But saw the underlying evidence. Reflexes honed to perfection, situational awareness unmatched, and a discipline in movement that could only come from years of intense training. Over coffee at the local diner, overheard a conversation that caused his pulse to quicken. Two older men, retired veterans, spoke in hushed tones about a legend from the classified circles they once navigated. "Did you hear?" one whispered, sliding a newspaper toward the other. "They say Moth is still out there somewhere. Ghost operator. No one ever saw her, but she never failed a mission." Froze, his mind racing. Moth. That call sign was not myth, it was legend. A name whispered among those who had witnessed or barely survived her operations. Moth had been a ghost in every sense: infiltration, intelligence recovery, covert extractions. Few had survived an encounter, and fewer still had confirmed her existence. Every story about her bordered on myth. Unaware of the conversation, continued her work in the library, yet she sensed the subtle presence of attention nearby. Old instincts, refined through years in high-risk operations, reminded her to stay aware. She could feel someone studying her, reading the spaces between her movements. Even after all these years, the ghost of her former life remained, as real as it had ever been. That evening, as the library closed, decided to approach her again, but carefully. He had learned long ago that direct confrontation could provoke resistance, particularly with someone whose training was extraordinary. Instead, he lingered across the street, watching, making mental notes, and piecing together a theory that seemed almost unbelievable. Could this quiet, polite librarian be the legendary moth? Every gesture, every precise movement he had observed during the parking lot incident suggested that the answer was yes. Noticed his presence from the corner of her eye. She adjusted her posture subtly, not out of fear but habit. Reflexes, awareness, and caution were permanent parts of her, even in a life she had worked to simplify. Years of hiding, of burying herself under layers of normalcy, could not erase what she had become. Yet she also knew that recognition, once sparked, could be dangerous. The wrong person noticing could unravel the careful balance she had built in this town. His curiosity intensified over the next few days. He began connecting dots that most would never even see. The scars on his hands, faint and carefully hidden beneath her sleeves, suggested encounters with explosives or shrapnel. The faint limp she occasionally concealed indicated an injury sustained long ago, one she had mastered rather than complained about. And most telling of all, the precision in her movements, subtle yet undeniable, spoke of decades of training that ordinary civilians could never replicate. Determined to confirm his suspicions, discreetly contacted a few old colleagues in intelligence and special operations. Without revealing his name, he described her patterns, her reactions, her discipline. The responses he received were telling. "Sounds like a ghost operator," one replied. "Someone who's been off the grid for a long time but could still operate at peak capacity if required." Another confirmed that there had been whispers of a woman matching his description, known for infiltrating hostile territories, extracting critical intelligence, and vanishing without a trace. Meanwhile, kept to her routines, unaware of the depth of attention her presence had attracted. She interacted with children, arranged historical documents, and offered guidance to researchers. Yet beneath the calm, the awareness remained. She sensed that her past life, the one she had buried, was drawing closer. She could feel the pull of it in the quiet moments, the hum of activity in the library, the sound of footsteps in the street, the faint rhythm of someone observing her. That evening she left the library later than usual. The streets were nearly deserted, shrouded in the soft glow of streetlights reflecting on the damp cobblestones. She walked briskly, yet deliberately, scanning alleys and entrances as she moved. Every sense remained active, every instinct sharp. Her life as a librarian was her sanctuary, but it had never been her full identity. Knew that the world she left behind had a way of resurfacing, and she felt the first stirrings of a challenge she could not ignore. Decided to take a more direct approach. He returned to the diner, this time intentionally leaving a copy of a military dossier open on a table in plain sight. The dossier contained redacted but recognizable details about moth missions, names, locations, and call signs. It was a calculated risk, designed to gauge reaction without direct confrontation. He observed the streets from the window, noting every movement, every glance, every hesitation. Noticed the dossier almost immediately. Something in her past responded, a whisper of recognition that stirred deep within her. She lingered, pretending casual interest, yet her mind raced through the possibilities. Whoever left this dossier here knew of her past, or at least suspected. The question was why, and whether it would compromise the life she had worked so hard to build. Later that night, returned to his lodging, reviewing mental notes from his observations. Every detail, the parking lot incident, her reactions to the dossier, the subtleties of her posture, confirmed what he already suspected. Ward was far more than a librarian. She had once been a covert operative of extraordinary skill, one whose existence had become legend under the call sign Moth. And if she was still in town, quietly observing, quietly protecting, Then the small coastal community was unknowingly sitting on a sleeping storm. Back in the quiet sanctuary of the library allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought of the missions, the lost teammates, the choices that had defined her. The call sign Moth had been more than an identity, it had been survival, precision, and purpose. She had abandoned it to preserve herself, to live quietly among ordinary people. And yet she could feel its pull again, subtle but undeniable. The past had a way of finding its way back, whether she was ready or not. In the dim glow of the library lamps, she catalogued her thoughts alongside the books and records she cared for. Every movement was deliberate, every decision cautious. Ward, Moth, former ghost operator and now librarian, knew that recognition by someone like Commander could be both a threat and an opportunity. She would need to decide, carefully and deliberately, whether to remain hidden or to confront the echoes of her past. As the night deepened and the town slept, the air seemed to hum with anticipation. Somewhere, the threads of past life were beginning to stir, and someone had noticed. The librarian, quiet and ordinary to the world, was about to face the first real signs that she could never fully escape who she had been. The early morning fog had lifted over the coastal town, leaving a crisp breeze that carried the tang of salt and seaweed. Ward arrived at the library as usual, moving with her quiet precision. The events of the past week, the car backfire, the child saved, the lingering attention of Commander kept her senses sharp. She had trained herself to blend into environments, to observe without revealing awareness, and yet something about its presence disturbed the rhythm she had built for herself. Across town, had spent the night sifting through contacts and archives, piecing together fragments of a story that felt almost mythical. He had reached out to colleagues in intelligence and special operations, carefully avoiding his name, describing instead her traits, movements, and extraordinary reflexes. Their responses confirmed what he had suspected but dared not fully believe. There was a woman, long off the grid, known in classified circles only by her call sign Moth. Legendary for infiltration, intelligence recovery, and covert operations, she had vanished years ago, leaving behind whispers and speculation. His mind returned again and again to the parking lot incident, had moved with an elegance and awareness impossible to mimic without experience. Every action, from dropping low to shield the child to assessing the surrounding environment, screamed of training that exceeded normal military conditioning. He had seen elite operators, men and women at the top of their field, and yet there was a unique precision in her movements, a fluidity, a calm, a deadly efficiency that set her apart. Determined to confirm his theory, accessed a restricted archive through a trusted former contact in Washington. He found a trove of partially redacted files detailing classified missions spanning years. Most of the records had been deliberately obscured, but one surviving page sent a shiver down his spine. It contained her call sign, her unit designation, and a sparse outline of missions that confirmed the legends: infiltration of hostile territories, extraction of critical intelligence, and survival against overwhelming odds. The call sign alone, Moth, was enough to give him chills. His eyes scanned the details, absorbing each piece of information with meticulous care. There were details of injuries, close calls, and operations so secret that the public would never know the full extent. A name appeared alongside the call sign, E. Ward. A familiar alignment of traits and initials confirmed his suspicion. Ward, the quiet librarian of this small town, was Moth. She had been one of the most effective covert operatives of her generation, and she had vanished from the world without a trace. Back at the library, moved among the shelves, unaware of the depth of discovery. She sensed attention, yes, but she did not yet know the magnitude. Her life had been carefully constructed. A quiet town, a library filled with books, a sense of normalcy she had not experienced in years. The routines of cataloging, organizing, and assisting visitors were her armor against a world that had demanded everything from her in the past. She had survived ambushes and covert operations. Here, among the stories of others, she could preserve herself. Yet instinctively, she knew that someone had begun to piece together what she had worked so hard to hide. His gaze, The lingering observation, the calculated movements outside the library, all of it suggested that recognition was near. The life she had escaped was approaching the surface. Had trained for years to survive in hostile environments, but she had not prepared for discovery in the quiet safety of a town library. Returned to the library one afternoon, approaching cautiously, conscious of the delicate balance he needed to maintain. He had to respect her privacy and autonomy while confirming the extraordinary theory forming in his mind. He lingered outside, observing her from the street, noting the subtle patterns of movement and awareness that confirmed what he already suspected. Her eyes, scanning for threats, flicked occasionally to the periphery, noting even the faintest disruptions. Every detail, from the way she shifted her weight to the subtle tension in her shoulders, told the story of a trained operative hiding in plain sight. That evening decided to make contact, but with the utmost caution. He waited until most of the patrons had left and the library was quiet, except for the gentle rustle of pages and the soft ticking of an old clock. Worked at her desk, repairing torn pages and cataloging new arrivals. She did not notice him immediately. When she finally looked up, she found him standing at the entrance, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "I need to speak with you," said evenly. "It's important." Paused, assessing him with the calm precision that had kept her alive for years. Her instincts flared, not in immediate threat, but in recognition of someone who could be significant. She allowed him a small nod. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady, controlled, and polite, betraying none of the tension coiled beneath. Stepped closer, careful not to break the invisible line of comfort she had established. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "I know about your past. I know your call sign." For the first time in years, composure wavered just slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in scrutiny. "You shouldn't know that," she replied, her voice measured but edged with warning. "I didn't come here to threaten you," said. "I came because I needed to understand. You're extraordinary, and I need to know if you're here by choice or if the world has finally caught up to you." Studied him for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities. How much did he know? How accurate were his assumptions? And most importantly, why now? She had left that life behind, buried it beneath routine and normalcy. Yet here was a man who had pieced it together, recognizing her despite the careful anonymity she had maintained for so long. Finally, she allowed a faint nod. "Yes," she said softly, "I was Moth, but I'm no longer that person. I've left it behind." His gaze softened, but his curiosity did not diminish. "Leaving it behind doesn't mean it's gone," he said. "People like us, we leave marks whether we want to or not. Your skills, your instincts, they didn't disappear, and neither did your enemies." His expression hardened slightly. The past she had sought to bury was not merely a collection of memories. It was a living, breathing force that could reach her even in this quiet town. "I chose this life," she said firmly. "I chose to preserve stories, not take lives. I chose to protect this town in my own way, quietly." Nodded, acknowledging her words while sensing the tension beneath them. "I understand, but some things have a way of resurfacing, whether we're ready or not. I just need to know if you're willing to face that possibility." Leaned back slightly, considering him. She had survived countless missions, witnessed tragedy, and endured losses that would have broken others. Yet the idea of being discovered, of having her past intrude upon the fragile life she had built, brought a tension she had not felt in years. For the first time, she realized that the quiet sanctuary she had created was not invulnerable. The conversation hung in the air, unspoken truths weighing heavily between them, had connected the dots. Ward was no longer just a librarian. She was Moth, and the world, and perhaps her own choices, was forcing her to reckon with that reality once more. As she returned to her work, repairing a delicate journal from the 1800s, she knew this encounter was only the beginning. Someone had recognized her, and someone had begun to understand the layers of her identity. The quiet librarian and the legendary operative were no longer separate. The past had found its way back to the present, and the question remained: how would respond when it demanded action? Left the library that evening with more questions than answers, yet a growing certainty. Ward was extraordinary. She was dangerous, skilled, and capable of feats few could imagine, and she was hiding intentionally in plain sight. If the past truly had returned, the town, the people, and even himself would soon discover just how formidable the woman known as Moth really was. The library was quiet that evening, bathed in the golden glow of the setting sun filtering through the tall windows. Shelves cast long shadows across the worn wooden floors, and the faint smell of old books mingled with the salt-laden breeze drifting in from the harbor. Ward moved between aisles, carefully cataloging donations and repairing damaged pages, her fingers deft and precise. The rhythm of the library had always been comforting, a sanctuary from the chaos of her past. Yet tonight she felt a subtle tension, one she couldn't entirely shake. Every instinct honed through years of covert operations whispered that something, or someone, was here with intent. It wasn't fear, it was awareness, the same careful vigilance that had kept her alive through ambushes, hostile terrain, and missions that demanded split-second decisions. Glanced toward the entrance, spotting Commander Jack stepping into the library with measured, deliberate steps. He didn't approach aggressively. His posture was relaxed but purposeful, his eyes calm yet piercing. Felt that familiar tug of scrutiny, a silent evaluation that mirrored her own instincts. She allowed herself to close the book she was repairing and placed it gently on the counter. "You're persistent," she said quietly, her voice even, controlled, and polite, but carrying an edge born of experience. "I need to speak with you," said, stepping a few paces closer. "Not as a commander or as a soldier, but as someone who knows who you really are." Studied him carefully, weighing every movement, every inflection. He was calm, confident, but not threatening. Still, the sudden proximity, the acknowledgement of knowledge she had worked so hard to conceal, brought a flicker of unease she hadn't felt in years. "Go ahead," she replied cautiously, keeping her tone even while her mind calculated possible outcomes. His gaze didn't waver. "I know who you are. I know your call sign. I know about your missions, your team, and everything you left behind." Her composure faltered for only a moment, a blink that no one but someone trained like would have noticed. His mind raced, recalling the past she had buried deep beneath the routines of the library. Ambushes in hostile territory, impossible extractions, the loss of teammates who had trusted her with their lives. She had survived while others hadn't, and she had abandoned that identity to preserve what little remained of herself. "You shouldn't know that," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying the weight of caution. "I didn't come to threaten you," said. "I came to understand. You're extraordinary, and I need to know if you're here because you chose to be, or because the past is finally catching up." His fingers flexed briefly against the counter. She had trained herself to manage stress, to conceal fear, and to think clearly in life-threatening situations. Yet the calm she had cultivated in this town, amidst books and ordinary routines, was now tested in a new way. Here was someone who recognized her, who saw through the carefully constructed mask of the librarian. "I chose this life," she said finally. "I chose quiet. I chose to preserve stories, not take lives. I chose to protect this town in ways that don't require killing. That life," she gestured vaguely, almost dismissively, "is over. It has to be." Studied her closely, noting every subtle tension in her posture. He had seen operators in extreme situations, people who survived when others failed, and yet his presence here combined the discipline of a soldier with the restraint of someone who had endured far too much. "Leaving it behind doesn't mean it's gone," he said. "Skills, instincts, experiences, they stay, and sometimes the world forces you to use them again." Her eyes flickered with the shadow of past missions, the memories she had deliberately tried to suppress. Each one was a story of survival, sacrifice, and loss. She remembered the ambush in the mountains, the team she had watched fall one by one, the calculated decisions that saved lives while taking others. She remembered being the only one left, the ghost that no one could find. That was Moth. and she had buried Moth deep beneath Ward, the librarian. "I survived," she whispered almost to herself. "I walked away. I promised myself I'd never return. I can't undo what's happened, but I won't let it define me anymore." Nodded slowly, a measure of respect evident in his eyes. "I understand. But what if that past finds you? What if it's already moving toward this town? And what if people here, innocent people, are in danger because of what you left behind?" His jaw tightened. She had hoped that the quiet town, the shelves of books, and the predictable routines would shield her from such questions. Yet the instincts that had kept her alive were already stirring. Protecting others had always been part of who she was. Choosing a life of peace didn't erase the lessons learned in the field, it simply deferred them. "I'm not a soldier anymore," she said firmly. "I've made that choice. I protect in other ways." His voice was calm but insistent. "Sometimes those ways aren't enough. I've seen what happens when someone like you steps away and the world keeps moving. You don't have to return to that life. But there are skills only you possess, skills that could prevent disaster, and if you don't act, others may suffer." His fingers flexed once again, this time against her own forearms. The weight of responsibility, even after years of absence, pressed against her chest. Her mind flickered between the life she had chosen, the calm, quiet librarian, and the life she could never truly abandon. Moth was part of her, whether she liked it or not. The ghosts of missions, lost teammates, and calculated risks were etched into her very being. She really looked at him and saw something she hadn't expected: respect, understanding, a recognition that did not demand compliance, only acknowledgement. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she could act, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. "The past has a way of finding us," she murmured. "Even here, even now, and sometimes we have to face it whether we want to or not." Nodded. "I didn't come here to drag you back. I came because you might want to help. You might have the chance to stop something before it happens, and I think you know better than anyone else what that means." Exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting to the stacks of books surrounding them. Stories preserved, knowledge held, a sanctuary of quiet and routine. Yet outside these walls the world was moving, dangerous and unpredictable. The skills she had abandoned, the identity she had hidden, could still make a difference. She understood that choice had consequences, but so did inaction. "I'll think about it," she said softly. Not a refusal, not an agreement, simply a consideration, a pause between the life she had chosen and the life she had once lived. For the first time in years, she acknowledged that the line between Ward, the librarian, and Moth, the operative, was thinner than she had believed. Offered her a small, respectful nod. "That's all I ask." He turned and left the library, leaving her in quiet reflection. Returned to her desk, resuming her work, but her mind was far from calm. The past had resurfaced, and the future would demand more than she had anticipated. Yet for the first time in years, she felt the faint stirrings of purpose, not obligation, but choice. The library, once a sanctuary, had become a threshold. Knew that the quiet life she had fought so hard to create was no longer entirely hers. The past had found a way back, and she had a decision to make. Protecting her town, her people, and perhaps herself would require embracing a part of her she had long tried to forget. And somewhere deep within, Moth stirred, not as a memory but as a presence, a readiness, a skill, a force poised to act when necessary. Ward, the quiet librarian, understood that her past was not finished with her. The confrontation had revealed the truth. She could not hide forever, and soon she might have to reclaim the skills and identity she had worked so hard to bury. The sun had barely risen over the coastal town when Ward stepped out of the library, the chill of early morning brushing against her skin. The streets were quiet, cobblestones glistening from overnight dew, and the faint smell of salt lingered in the air. For a moment, the town felt like the sanctuary she had carefully built, predictable, safe, and ordinary. But deep down, sensed the disturbance beneath the surface, the subtle vibrations of something she had long thought buried. It began with small signs, packages delivered to neighbors that didn't match the addresses, vehicles parked in unusual patterns near the docks, and the occasional shadow that seemed to move with a purposeful intent rather than randomness. Instincts, honed over years of covert operations, recognized patterns where others saw coincidence. There was a method to these disturbances, a message hidden beneath the ordinary. From across town, Commander Jack observed the same signs, silently tracking potential threats. He had been in contact with intelligence sources, quietly piecing together what he could about the movements around the coastal area. What worried him wasn't just the presence of suspicious activity, it was that had reacted to it long before he even had a chance to detect the patterns. She was already aware, already calculating, already preparing. Inside the library, began to methodically prepare. Books were arranged with dual purposes, some for preservation, others to conceal communication devices and emergency supplies she had quietly maintained over the years. Every drawer, every shelf, every floorboard contained hidden tools or encrypted messages. The town saw a quiet librarian, but behind the calm was a woman ready to confront danger head-on. Had learned enough from observation and inquiry to understand the gravity of the situation. He approached carefully, mindful that direct interference could compromise both her safety and the investigation. He said, using her name deliberately, "There's something moving in this area, something or someone dangerous, and I think it's heading straight toward this town." She paused, a faint tension tightening her jaw. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with the awareness of someone who had faced far worse. "Patterns," replied. "Reports from the base, movement of known operatives, suspicious intelligence chatter. I've seen it before. They're organized, precise, and they're coming here for a reason." His mind raced. She had long buried the part of herself that recognized the tactics, strategies, and methods of operatives who had once been adversaries in foreign conflicts. Yet now, the familiar signs pressed against the quiet life she had built, threatening to shatter it. "Then we need to be ready," she said quietly, her voice betraying no fear, only determination. The two of them began to strategize. News capabilities better than anyone else in the town could, and he approached her not as a commander issuing orders but as an ally recognizing a peer. His instincts guided their planning, exit routes, surveillance points, communication channels, and contingency plans. Every scenario was analyzed, every weakness considered, every risk mitigated. As they worked, could feel the presence of her past life returning, not as a memory but as a living, urgent force. She thought of her missions, the team members she had lost, the operations that demanded precision and sacrifice. All of it had shaped her into someone capable of confronting threats like the one approaching. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel the weight of responsibility, not just for herself, but for the town that had become her home. Outside, shadows began to lengthen as unknown operatives moved closer. Surveillance from the base indicated that a small, highly trained unit was advancing toward the coastal town, undetected by local authorities. Their objective remained unclear, but the signs were unmistakable: reconnaissance, pattern disruption, and strategic positioning that suggested a high-value target was nearby. Felt the surge of focus she had once known in missions abroad. Her senses sharpened, her mind calculating variables at speeds most humans could not comprehend. She moved quietly through the library, checking every door, every window, every potential point of entry. Each step, each decision was deliberate. Failure was not an option, not for her, not for the people who unknowingly relied on her vigilance. Observing her, understood fully what he was witnessing. Ward, the librarian, was transforming before his eyes into Moth, the operative. It wasn't a performance. It was instinct, honed through years of survival, loss, and mastery of covert operations. He felt a surge of respect and cautious optimism. With her skills and his resources, they had a chance to confront the approaching threat before it could reach the town. As dusk fell, the tension in the town streets became palpable. Lights flickered in the distance as the unit approached, their movements precise and silent, and positioned themselves strategically, using the layout of the library and surrounding buildings to their advantage. Communication devices were discreetly activated, and coded signals were exchanged, preparing for contingencies that could unfold in mere minutes. Thoughts drifted briefly to the choices that had led her here. She had abandoned Moth to protect herself and the lives she could influence quietly. Yet the past had a way of catching up, and she realized that ignoring it now was no longer an option. She was ready to face whatever came, not as a ghost of her former life, but as a guardian who could blend intellect, skill, and experience into action. The first signs of confrontation appeared, a shadow moving across a rooftop, a faint rustle of activity in the alley behind the library, and moved with precision, silently coordinating their positions. Every muscle, every reflex, every decision was the product of years of expertise. They were no longer just a librarian and a commander. They were a team capable of confronting threats that ordinary people could not comprehend. Minutes stretched into tense anticipation as the unknown unit closed in. His breath was steady, her mind a perfect synthesis of strategy, awareness, and instinct, monitored from a discreet distance, providing critical intelligence and tactical support. Together, they formed a silent, formidable force, poised to defend the town from an approaching danger that had remained hidden until now. Then a faint signal, the first active movement from the operatives, confirmed their approach. Instincts flared. This was no random threat. It was targeted, calculated, and deliberate. She understood immediately that the unit had knowledge, training, and intent. The enemy was skilled, but she was Moth. The calm, ordinary librarian had returned, not as a civilian, but as a protector ready to act when the stakes could not be ignored. Sensing her readiness, remained in position, coordinating support while allowing to take the lead. He had seen elite operators in action, but witnessing her transformation, quiet, composed, and lethal, was extraordinary. The town, still oblivious to the danger at its gates, remained unaware that their fate rested in the hands of a woman whose legend had once spanned continents. Tightened her grip on her improvised tools, each selected for strategic necessity rather than brute force. Her mind mapped escape routes for civilians, calculated angles for defense, and predicted potential maneuvers by the approaching unit. She was calm, precise, and entirely in control. The librarian was gone for now. Moth had returned, fully aware that the quiet town depended on her vigilance, skill, and experience. As the shadows drew closer and exchanged a brief, silent acknowledgement, the partnership had formed organically through mutual recognition of skill and purpose. Together, they would face the threat, blending strategy, stealth, and precision into a coordinated defense. The town's fate hung in the balance, resting on the shoulders of a woman who had once been legend and a commander who understood the gravity of what was unfolding. For there was no hesitation. The past had returned and it demanded action. She would not shy away. She had survived impossible odds before, and she would do so again, not for glory, not for recognition, but for the lives of people who had come to rely unknowingly on her quiet vigilance. The shadows approaching were dangerous, skilled, and precise. But Ward Moth was ready. Night had fallen over the coastal town, shrouding streets and alleys in a thick cloak of darkness. The quiet hum of distant traffic and the faint whisper of waves against the docks provided a deceptive serenity. Ward stood near the library's back entrance, her eyes scanning the shadows with a precision that belied the calm exterior. Every sense was alert, every muscle coiled and ready. The threat was real, imminent, and highly skilled. Across the street, Commander Jack observed the situation with the patience and calculation that had served him in countless operations. His respect for her had deepened over the past days, as he witnessed not just her awareness but her unspoken command of the environment. He had seen elite operators before, but its combination of speed, intuition, and strategic foresight was unlike anything he had encountered. She was preparing not just to confront danger, but to orchestrate the encounter with surgical precision. The first movement came like a shadow slipping across a knife's edge, silent, deliberate. A small, highly trained unit advanced along the perimeter of the town, positioning themselves strategically near the docks and narrow streets. Their objective was unclear, but instincts immediately assessed their capabilities: expert reconnaissance, precision, and lethal efficiency. This was not random. This was professional. With a single glance, communicated her plan to without words. The subtle shift of her weight, the angle of her gaze, the movement of her fingers toward her concealed tools, everything signaled the strategy she had already formulated in seconds. They were to draw the unit away from civilians, isolate them, and neutralize the threat before it could escalate. Nodded slightly, his confidence in her abilities unspoken but evident. He had seen enough to trust that she could execute flawlessly, moved with deliberate speed, slipping through shadows, using the environment to her advantage. Every corner, every doorway, every alley was considered. She was invisible to the untrained eye, yet every movement was purposeful, calculated, and lethal if needed. The unit reached the first checkpoint near the harbor, unaware that their movements were being monitored and anticipated. Had already positioned herself along the route, using the dim light and strategic vantage points to control the flow of the approaching operatives. She remained calm, her breathing steady, every step measured, every calculation precise. Years of experience in hostile zones allowed her to see the battle before it unfolded. Suddenly, one operative turned a corner and came face to face with her. Reflexes were instantaneous. With a swift, precise motion, she disarmed him and moved him silently out of the path of others. The rest of the unit, realizing something was amiss, began to adjust, but was already repositioning, anticipating their response. Every move she had made was part of a larger choreography, a symphony of strategy designed to neutralize the threat without unnecessary exposure. Moved in concert with her, covering positions and providing support where needed. He communicated silently, using hand signals and gestures honed over years of missions. His awareness of him and his movements allowed them to operate almost telepathically. The quiet librarian was gone. In her place stood Moth, legendary operative, orchestrating the engagement with the precision of someone who had survived countless life-and-death encounters. The confrontation escalated as the unit attempted to regroup, anticipated their strategies, predicting their movements based on subtle cues, shifts in weight, changes in posture, and the rhythm of their steps. She neutralized each threat with surgical efficiency, leaving minimal evidence of her presence while maintaining control over the environment. Her expertise was undeniable, her actions almost poetic in their precision. Watched in awe as moved through the shadows, her mind and body functioning as one. He had witnessed elite operators in action, but never had he seen someone so seamlessly integrate strategy, skill, and intuition. She was not merely defending the town. She was commanding it, guiding the flow of events with a mastery that left no room for error. The remaining operatives realized the situation was beyond their control. Panic flickered in their eyes as they tried to regroup, only to find themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Anticipated every escape route, every tactical adjustment, and every potential threat. Her actions were decisive, leaving the operatives unable to predict her moves. They were trapped, outmatched, and unaware of the full extent of her capabilities. Finally, the confrontation reached its climax near the edge of the harbor. Had isolated the remaining threats, neutralizing them with precision and minimal risk. The town remained oblivious to the danger that had passed, unaware that their safety had been secured by a woman they believed to be a simple librarian. Approached her as the dust settled, his expression a mixture of respect and amazement. "I've seen a lot in my life," he said quietly, "but I've never seen anything like that. You're extraordinary." Allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I've survived this long," she replied, her voice calm, "by staying prepared and remaining aware. The world doesn't wait for anyone, and danger doesn't announce itself." Studied her, understanding the weight of what she had just done. She had not only neutralized the immediate threat but had done so with a level of skill and foresight that few could comprehend. Her past life as Moth had not been erased. It had only lain dormant, ready to awaken when circumstances demanded. As they walked back through the quiet streets, the town's lights reflecting on the damp cobblestones felt the familiar stirrings of purpose return. She had chosen this quiet life, but the events of the past days had reminded her that she could not completely escape her identity. Her skills, her instincts, and her experiences were part of who she was, and they could not be ignored. Spoke softly, almost as an afterthought. You didn't have to do this alone, but you did, and you were perfect. Allowed herself a brief smile, acknowledging both his praise and the truth of it. I've had a lot of practice, she said quietly, and sometimes practice is all that separates life from chaos. For a moment the two of them walked in silence, the tension of the night slowly easing. The town slept peacefully, unaware of the storm that had passed through its streets. Its dual identity, librarian and operative, had been revealed at least to, and the consequences of that revelation would shape the days to come. She returned to the library, checking every detail, ensuring no trace of the confrontation remained. Books were in place, shelves straightened, and the quiet rhythm of the library resumed. Yet she knew that her life had irrevocably changed. The calm she had cultivated was now intertwined with the reality of her past, a past that would not remain dormant forever. Remained outside for a moment, reflecting on what he had witnessed. Ward was more than a legend. She was a force of nature, capable of extraordinary feats under pressure. The librarian had masked a lifetime of skill, training, and survival instincts. And now, having seen her in action, he understood fully why she had been both feared and revered in her former life. As the night deepened, sat at her desk, cataloging new arrivals and repairing old journals. The quiet of the library was comforting, but her mind was alive with calculations, awareness, and anticipation. The past had returned, the present demanded vigilance, and the future promised challenges she could not ignore. Yet for the first time in years, she felt fully prepared to face whatever came next. Moth was no longer just a memory. She was alive, aware, and ready. And the town, quiet, oblivious, and unsuspecting, was under the watchful protection of one of the most skilled operatives to have ever lived. The sun rose slowly over the coastal town, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The streets glistened from a morning drizzle, and the scent of salt lingered faintly in the air. For the townspeople, it was just another ordinary day. Life would continue as it had, unaware that danger had once again skirted its edges, thanks to a quiet librarian who had hidden extraordinary skills beneath an unassuming exterior. Ward moved through the library with her usual calm precision, cataloging new donations and assisting patrons with polite efficiency. Yet beneath the surface, her mind was alert, already reviewing the events of the previous night. She had faced the threat head-on, neutralized the operatives, and ensured that the town remained safe. The exhilaration of the confrontation, the surge of instinct and strategy, had reminded her of the duality that existed within her. Ward, the librarian, and Moth, the operative. Commander Jack arrived shortly afterward, a rare cup of coffee in hand, and entered the library with quiet reverence. He had spent the night coordinating follow-up intelligence and monitoring any potential residual threats, but his primary focus was now on. The events of the past nights had revealed her true identity, her capabilities, and the depths of her experience. He understood that the librarian was just one layer of a woman whose legend had once spanned continents. You handled it well, said quietly, placing the cup on her desk. His tone was calm but carried the weight of admiration. More than well, you were incredible. Allowed herself a small smile, acknowledging both his words and the truth in them. It's been a long time, she said softly. I've practiced surviving, observing, calculating, more than most people could ever imagine, but it's been years since I had to put it all to use. Nodded, understanding the unspoken complexity of her statement. I saw it last night, he said. Everything. Your instincts, your precision, the way you controlled the environment. You were Moth again, even if just for a few hours. For a moment reflected on what she had become. Moth was not merely a call sign. It was a culmination of training, discipline, loss, and survival. It had once defined her, demanded everything from her, and shaped the decisions she made in the most critical moments of her life. And yet, Ward, the quiet librarian, had learned to live with that part of herself, to keep it in reserve, dormant until it was needed. "The town is safe," she said finally, her voice firm but calm. "For now. That doesn't mean the danger is gone forever, but for today, for this moment, it is." Studied her, nodding, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the awareness still coiled within her gaze, and the quiet strength that radiated from her every movement. "You didn't have to do it alone," he said. "But you did, and the way you executed it, it's more than I could have hoped for." Nodded, her fingers brushing over the edge of a book as if grounding herself in the ordinary amidst the extraordinary. "I had to do it," she admitted, "because no one else could. Not like me. Not with my knowledge, my experience, my instincts. That's why I do this, quietly, behind the scenes." His eyes softened with understanding. "You've been hiding for years," he said. "But hiding doesn't erase skill, and skill doesn't fade. You've proven that not just to me, but to anyone who underestimated the quiet librarian in front of them." The library doors opened briefly as a young patron entered, carrying a stack of books, oblivious to the conversation and the storm that had passed through the town. Smiled politely, helping the child arrange the books on the counter. The contrast between the ordinary tasks of the day and the extraordinary events of the night reminded her why she had chosen this life. Protection could take many forms, and sometimes the simplest gestures were just as vital as any mission overseas. As the morning progressed and reviewed the events in detail, the operatives had been highly skilled, but they had underestimated her preparedness, her anticipation, and her ability to control the battlefield with minimal exposure. The town remained unaware of how close it had come to danger. Intelligence suggested that the unit had retreated, regrouped, and possibly reconsidered any future attempts. For the first time in years, felt a measure of closure, a sense that she had reclaimed control without compromising her sanctuary. Yet she also knew that her dual identity could not remain entirely hidden, had seen her capabilities firsthand. He understood her, respected her, and recognized the burden and power she carried. The question now was how to reconcile these two halves of herself, the librarian and the operative, the quiet protector and the legendary Moth. "I can't go back fully," said, her voice steady, eyes thoughtful. "I've chosen this life for a reason, but I can't ignore what I am capable of. I won't abandon either part of myself, not entirely. I'll remain vigilant, prepared, and ready, but I will choose when to act, not be forced into it." Smiled faintly, a mixture of respect and relief. "That's wise," he said, "and it's what makes you extraordinary. You've survived not just by skill, but by making the right choices. That balance, it's rare." The town remained blissfully unaware of the events that had transpired over the past nights. Life resumed its quiet rhythm, fishermen at the docks, children playing near the harbor, tourists strolling through the streets. To the outside world, Ward was simply the librarian, calm, polite, and ordinary. Yet within her, a legacy remained alive and unbroken. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges, walked along the docks, the ocean breeze stirring her hair. Commander accompanied her, maintaining a respectful distance. Words were few, but the silence was comfortable, shared between two individuals who understood the weight of the past and the responsibility of skill. "You've built something rare here," said finally. "A life that protects without revealing itself. Most people would never understand how extraordinary that is." Glanced at him, her expression calm, almost serene. "Extraordinary or not, it's mine," she said softly. "And it's enough for me, for the town, for now. I don't need recognition. I don't need accolades. I need purpose, and this life, this quiet, careful vigilance, is enough." nodded, silently acknowledging her words. He had seen legends in action, but few had such restraint, such wisdom, and such self-awareness. Choice to protect quietly, to blend the ordinary with the extraordinary, was as remarkable as her capabilities. As darkness settled over the town, returned to the library one last time for the day. She walked among the shelves, her fingers tracing the spines of old books, each one a story preserved, a life remembered, a lesson shared. She was a guardian of knowledge and of people, a protector in shadows, and a force of calm in a world that often demanded chaos. Remained outside, watching the lights glow through the library windows. He knew the town was safe for now. He also knew that Ward, the librarian, had embraced her dual identity, both ordinary and legendary, quiet yet formidable, peaceful yet prepared. The town would continue its life unaware of how close danger had come, and that was precisely how she intended to keep it. Sat at her desk, cataloging the day's new arrivals, yet her mind remained alert. She understood that vigilance was not a choice, it was a responsibility. And though Moth had once been a name whispered in fear across continents, now it existed quietly, carefully, within a woman who had chosen to protect in ways both visible and invisible. She smiled faintly, turning a page in an ancient journal, the ordinary act grounding her amidst extraordinary capability. The past had returned, danger had tested her, and she had prevailed. Yet she had also chosen the life she wanted to live, merging the calm of Ward with the lethal precision of Moth. She was both. She was prepared. And she was finally at peace, at least, until the next call to action arose. The town slept, unaware, safe, and protected. And in the quiet of the library, amidst the shelves and stories, Ward continued her dual legacy, guardian of knowledge, keeper of peace, and legend in waiting.